Okay, so we're going to be looking at the Footballguys Game Log Dominator today and how it helped me uncover big, low-owned DFS performances from both Eli Manning and Drew Brees in Week 8 of the 2015 season. I'm going to start from the Footballguys.com homepage, mouse over Stats, and choose Game Log Dominator. This is a tool that allows us to search the last 14 years of game logs using a number of filters. As we go, you're going to see that you can form advanced queries that can be used for all sorts of studies, but we're going to keep it simple today and use the Dominator for some detail on opposing defensive matchups. Again, I originally did this research ahead of Week 8 last season, so I'm going to set the year filter to search only 2015, and I want to look at Weeks 1 through 7. Now I can filter by individual players, teams they're playing for, or playing against. We'll look at Eli Manning first, and I want to know how opposing quarterbacks have fared against his opponent this week, the Saints. So I'm going to choose playing against the Saints, and I'll set the position to QBs only. For this search, I'll leave age and experience alone, but you can get an idea of how that information could be useful for deep historical dives. Home road could offer you some great results. I'm not going to do it here, but Drew Brees' fantasy points per game increased by about 25% in home games dating back to 2011, which is something the Dominator has the ability to show me, and certainly something I considered before playing him. You can filter game logs by wins and losses. This is also useful in DFS. If you have a strong feeling a particular team is going to win, analyzing their opportunity in past wins can give you a nice predictive edge. You've got additional filters here if you want to see only division games or conference games, and then you can even set minimum statistical filters of all different types depending on what kind of stats you want to see from the game logs. Again, this is a simple example, and I've set all the filters I need to in order to see opposing quarterbacks against the Saints, so I'm going to click Dominate. Here are my results, and now looking week by week, I can see Carson Palmer burned the Saints in Week 1 for over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns, finishing as the QB2. There was Jameis Winston, in his second game as a pro, mind you, finishing middle of the pack at quarterback. Cam Newton had a QB3 finish against the Saints in Week 3. Then Joe Webb must have come in for a play or two. And then we had Brandon Weeden in Week 4 manage a respectable 246 yards and a touchdown. And that was followed by 333 and 2 touchdowns from Sam Bradford in Week 5, 295 and 2 from Matt Ryan in Week 6, and 333 and 3 touchdowns from Andrew Luck in the previous game. So, in looking at these results, the only quarterbacks who failed to turn in fantasy QB1 performances against the Saints were Jameis Winston in his second game ever, and Brandon Weeden, who is absolutely terrible. Everything we're seeing here supports the Saints' horrendous normalized fantasy points against QB ranking. A cool part of the Game Log Dominator is if I just hit the back button on my browser, it will back up my search and remember all my inputs. So I'll do that and change the playing against filter to the Giants. Everything else is the same, and then I'll click Dominate. So now we're looking at how opposing QBs fared against the Giants through the first 7 weeks. Tony Romo went over 350 yards and passed for 3 touchdowns against them in Week 1. Matt Ryan was over the 360 mark against them in Week 2. Kirk Cousins had a poor performance in Week 3, but remember, to this point in the season, Cousins was still terrible, and 300-plus passing yards and a touchdown could have been much worse. Tyrod Taylor had a middling game against the Giants in Week 4. Here's a solid back-end QB1 performance by Colin Kaepernick, who had an awful season, by the way, in Week 5. And now the Giants turned it on their last 2 games against Sam Bradford and Matt Castle, nobody's idea of good fantasy quarterbacks. The case can be made that by this point in the season, the Giants had faced 2 good quarterbacks, and both had passed for over 350 yards against them in neutral game scripts. Raw fantasy points allowed to the position, the stat most casual fantasy players look at, was including a bunch of bums in the sample. So again, this reinforced what Austin Lee's normalized strength of schedule chart was telling us about the Giants' pass defense, and pointed to Brees as a great play.